Ethan Collins was a charming and successful businessman, known both for his wealth and his unshakable confidence. During a party in Manhattan, surrounded by influential friends and loud laughter, he didn't know that a simple bet launched as a joke would completely change his life. When his friend Mark challenged Ethan to marry a woman outside the beauty standards he used to value, he accepted without blinking. After all, for Ethan, everything was a game, and winning was his natural instinct. But fate had other plans, and he was about to meet Grace Thompson, a woman whose inner strength and authenticity would forever change his view of what truly matters. It was a typical Manhattan night, with a glow of lights reflecting off the skyscrapers and the sound of parties echoing through the streets. Ethan was in the center of a luxurious penthouse, surrounded by friends drinking champagne and sharing stories of conquests. He was the center of attention, as always, talking about his latest successful trade. Mark, his longtime friend, watched him with an enigmatic smile. "Ethan, you always win at everything, don't you?" he said, leaning casually across the bar. "But I think there is a challenge you wouldn't have the courage to accept." Ethan raised his eyebrows, intrigued. "Oh, yeah. And what would that be?" he asked, with an air of superiority. He loved a good challenge. Mark smiled, taking a sip of his drink. "Marrying someone who isn't your type. A woman you would never consider, someone ordinary. I bet you couldn't last 6 months." The room fell silent, and all eyes turned to Ethan. He laughed, but his defiant expression made it clear that he would not refuse the provocation. 6 months? "Consider it done," he said, raising his glass. What he didn't know was that this gamble would be unlike any other he had ever faced. Mark reveals that he has already chosen who Ethan's future bride will be, leaving everyone surprised. Grace Thompson was a literature professor who lived a simple but fulfilling life in a quiet New York neighborhood. Known for her intelligence and sharp humor, she was oblivious to the power and ego competitions that dominated Ethan's world. When Mark showed up at her regular coffee shop with a strange proposition, she was intrigued. "You want me to do what?" Grace asked, looking at Mark in disbelief as she calmly stirred her coffee. Mark smiled, trying to hide his discomfort. "Just get to know Ethan. He's an interesting guy, and I think you two could get along well. Besides, he needs to learn some things, and you're the right person for that." Grace laughed, but her eyes showed curiosity. "This sounds more like a social experiment than a date," he said, shaking his head. "But you know what? It could be fun." When Grace finally met Ethan at a cafe, Mark suggested, it was as if two worlds collided. Ethan, with his impeccable suit and calculated smile, contrasted with Grace, dressed casually and with a confident gleam in her eyes. She noticed immediately that there was something strange about his behavior, but decided to follow through and see how far it would go. During their date, Grace asks a perplexing question that leaves Ethan speechless. Ethan knew that Grace wasn't like the women he was used to meeting. She was direct, confident, and clearly not impressed with her appearance or status. It disconcerted him, but it also intrigued him. Over coffee, he decided to be honest, at least in part. "Look, Grace, I'll be blunt. I have a challenge going on. A deal, so to speak," Ethan said, trying to gauge her reaction. "I need to get married for 6 months. Are you willing to embark on that?" Grace crossed her arms, leaning forward. "And why would I agree to something like that? What's in it for me?" Ethan smiled, impressed by her directness. "Complete freedom for the 6 months. I will respect your space, and you can live your life as you wish. Plus, there is financial compensation." Grace was silent for a moment, pondering. "Money has never been my goal, but I have reason to consider it." "That's okay, Ethan. But know this, I'm not someone who's easy to manipulate." With that, they shook hands, sealing the deal. Grace already had her own plans in mind, and Ethan, in turn, believed he was about to walk away with another easy victory. Grace places an unexpected condition on the contract, which leaves Ethan surprised and suspicious. The wedding day was a quick and unglamorous ceremony, feeling more like a legal formality than a romantic event. Ethan, in his elegant suit, and Grace, in a simple dress, exchanged emotionless vows, but with a palpable sense of tension in the air. "So that's it," Grace said as they signed the papers. "I hope you're ready for what lies ahead." Ethan laughed, but there was something in her expression that made him feel a twinge of nervousness. He tried to ignore it, turning his attention to planning the life they would now share. The first night in Ethan's luxurious apartment was marked by silence and distance. Grace explored the space, but seemed oblivious to the luxury that surrounded her. "Beautiful, but empty," he commented, noting the minimalist and expensive decor. Ethan, accustomed to praise and admiration, was taken aback. He tried to start a conversation, but Grace seemed more interested in settling in and going about her routine than in impressing him. During the night, Grace finds something in one of the rooms that raises questions about Ethan's past. While exploring the apartment, Grace found an old photograph of Ethan with an older man, both smiling in front of a corporate building. There was something about Ethan's expression in the photo that caught his attention, something vulnerable, almost lost. The next morning, she decided to question him. "Who's that in the photo?" he asked, placing the portrait on the breakfast table. Ethan hesitated, his eyes fixed on the image. "It's my father. He passed away a few years ago." "Why?" Grace noticed the change in his tone and decided not to press. "I just thought it was interesting." "You look different there, look that stiff." Her words stuck in Ethan's mind throughout the day. He wasn't used to being analyzed so deeply, and it bothered and intrigued him at the same time. Meanwhile, Grace began to piece together the puzzle that was Ethan Collins. Ethan receives an urgent call that forces him to face a difficult decision involving Grace and his work. It was a quiet morning in Ethan's apartment when his phone rang, displaying his lawyer's name. He answered with a serious expression, moving away from Grace to speak in private. On the other end of the line, his lawyer's deep voice informed him that an important corporate contract was at risk. "Ethan, your presence is essential. But there's one detail: Grace needs to be there with you. Investors want to meet your wife to reinforce the company's family image." Ethan hung up, frustrated. He never imagined that his sham marriage would become relevant in his corporate world. Grace, curious, asked what was going on. "You'll need to accompany me to an important meeting," he said, trying to sound casual. Grace crossed her arms, studying him. "Let me guess, you want me to pretend to be a devoted wife to impress someone, right?" Ethan hesitated before nodding, aware that she didn't like being used as a pawn in his game. Even though she was reluctant, Grace agreed, but made it clear that she would set her own limits. "I will, Ethan, but only if I can be myself. Don't expect me to represent something I'm not." At the meeting, Grace surprises everyone with her authenticity, leaving Ethan impressed and the investors with doubts about him. When Ethan and Grace arrived at the meeting location, a stylish office in Midtown Manhattan, all eyes turned to her. Unlike the impeccably groomed women Ethan often brought to events, Grace wore a simple but elegant dress that reflected her authenticity. During the meeting, investors asked Grace casual questions, expecting generic answers. But she surprised them with her intelligence and humor. When one of them commented on the marriage, Grace responded, "Well, living with Ethan is a challenge, but I think I'm up to it." The room erupted in laughter, as Ethan was torn between admiration and embarrassment. He realized that Grace had achieved something he rarely achieved in negotiations, genuinely earning everyone's trust and respect. After the meeting, one of the investors commented to Ethan, "You made a good choice. Your wife has a strong presence. I think we can close the deal." Grace realizes that Ethan was uncomfortable with his compliments on her and decides to confront him about his true feelings. Back at the apartment, Grace wasted no time. "You seemed uncomfortable when they praised my attitude in the meeting." "Why?" he asked, facing Ethan directly. Ethan hesitated, but finally responded, "I didn't expect you to attract so much attention. I'm used to being the focus, and today you stole the show." Grace smiled slightly, but her eyes were serious. "Maybe you need to learn that the world doesn't revolve around you, Ethan. There's more strength in sharing the spotlight than trying to control it." Her words stuck in Ethan's mind for the rest of the night. For the first time, he began to realize that perhaps there was something more valuable than personal success: the ability to recognize and value others. If you're enjoying this heartwarming story, subscribe now to Timeless Tales USA so you don't miss the next ones. We have incredible stories that inspire, move, and surprise. Click the subscribe button and activate the bell to follow each chapter of this journey. Movie camera sparkle. Ethan decides to do something special for Grace, but his plan is interrupted by unexpected news. The next morning, as Ethan planned to surprise Grace with a special dinner, his phone rang again. It was Mark, the friend who had started the bet. "You're doing well, Ethan, but remember, the clock is ticking. If you want to win, you need to make sure Grace continues to believe in his marriage." Ethan felt a pang of discomfort. Until then, he had seen the bet as a joke, but now he was beginning to question whether he was right to involve Grace in this without revealing the truth. Grace, who heard part of the conversation, casually asked, "Who was that on the phone?" Ethan stuttered, making up an excuse, but she noticed his hesitation. Grace begins to suspect that Ethan is hiding something and decides to investigate on her own. In the days that followed, Grace observed Ethan more closely. His behavior seemed more nervous, and his evasive answers only increased his suspicions. Determined to discover the truth, she began searching the apartment for clues. It was while tidying up the room that he found something curious, a note from Mark, thanking Ethan for accepting the challenge. The message was unclear, but it aroused his curiosity even more. Grace confronted Ethan, but he managed to deflect the conversation with a vague explanation. "Mark likes to make jokes. He's just a friend trying to tease me," he said, laughing nervously. Grace pretended to believe it, but she was determined to find out what was really going on. Grace decides to meet Mark in person to get answers, without telling Ethan. Grace knew that Mark was the key to understanding what Ethan was hiding. Using information she found on one of the business cards left in the apartment, she located Mark's office address. Without telling Ethan, he decided to confront him in person. Upon arrival, she was greeted by the receptionist, who seemed surprised to hear that Grace was Ethan's wife. A few minutes later, Mark appeared, smiling warmly. You must be the famous Grace. What brings you here?" he asked, with a slightly sarcastic tone. Grace wasted no time. "I want to know the truth. What is this dare you and Ethan are hiding from me?" Mark hesitated, surprised by the direct approach. He tried to dodge, but Grace insisted. "I already know something's up. You can tell me, or I'll figure it out myself." Under pressure, Mark began to falter. "I think this is something Ethan should tell you, not me," he said evasively. Grace realized that Mark wouldn't give anything away easily, but his reaction only confirmed her suspicions. Deciding not to wait any longer, Grace confronts Ethan directly about what is happening. When Grace returned home, Ethan immediately noticed something was wrong. She crossed the room with determination and stopped in front of him. "Ethan, no more lies. I went to Mark's office today. I want to know what you are hiding from me." Ethan went pale. He tried to divert the conversation, but Grace interrupted him. "I'm tired of being kept in the dark. If you don't tell me now, I'll walk out that door and not come back." Cornered, Ethan took a deep breath and decided to reveal part of the truth. "Okay, I confess. Mark and I made a stupid bet. He doubted I could adapt to something outside my norm. And you were part of that bet." Grace was silent for a few seconds, processing the revelation. "So this was all just a game for you? I'm just a dare to stroke your ego." Ethan tried to justify himself, but every word only made the situation worse. Grace walked away, tears in her eyes. "I thought you were starting to change, but now I see it was all a lie." She grabbed her bag and left, leaving Ethan alone with his guilt. Then Finn realizes he is about to lose Grace forever and decides to fight to regain her trust. Ethan spent the night awake, reliving the argument and thinking about how to fix the mistake. He knew he couldn't undo what he did, but he needed to find a way to show Grace that she meant more to him than any bet. The next day, Ethan started planning. He decided that he needed to prove his sincerity not just with words, but with actions. Her first step was to seek emotional support and advice. He called his sister, Emily, a person who had always advised him in difficult times. "You're in a sticky situation, Ethan," Emily said. "But if you really love her, show it with actions. And most of all, be honest about everything. No more half-truths." Ethan listened carefully and decided he would do something special. He knew that Grace liked simple but meaningful actions. He prepared a homemade dinner with all her favorite foods and wrote a heartfelt letter explaining his feelings. Grace returns to the apartment, but her reaction to Ethan's efforts is not what he expected. When Grace returned to the apartment, she found dinner prepared and the letter left on the table. She hesitated before taking the letter, but finally began to read it. Ethan watched from afar, saying nothing, as she absorbed every word. In the letter, Ethan admitted the whole truth, from the initial bet to how he had begun to genuinely fall in love with her. "I was a selfish fool," he said, "but you showed me that there is something much more important in life than winning or controlling. You taught me the value of respect and true love." Grace finished reading and looked at Ethan. "Do you think this is enough to fix what you did?" he asked, his voice full of emotion. Ethan shook his head. "No, but it's a start, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to earn your trust." Grace sighed deeply, clearly torn. "I need time, Ethan. Time to think about whether I can forgive this." As Grace reflects, Ethan faces a new crisis that threatens not only their relationship but also his career. The next morning, Ethan received an urgent call from his assistant. One of his company's biggest contracts was in jeopardy due to rumors about his personal life. News about her bet with Mark had leaked, and investors began to question her integrity. Ethan rushed to the office, where his team was trying to control the crisis. During a tense meeting, one of the most influential investors said, "Ethan, we trust you, but your personal life is affecting the business. We want an explanation." Ethan felt the weight of the situation. For the first time, he realized that his thoughtless actions were not only destroying his relationship with Grace, but also threatening everything he had built in his career. After the meeting, Ethan received a text from Grace. "We need to talk." He knew the moment of truth was approaching, both in his personal and professional life. Grace confronts Ethan about the bet leak, and the two must decide if they can face the consequences together. Grace met Ethan at the cafe near their apartment. She seemed calm, but her firm stance showed that she wasn't there to smooth things over. As soon as they sat down, she got straight to the point. "How did the bet story get into the media, Ethan? Did you talk to anyone?" Ethan shook his head, exasperated. "It wasn't me, Grace. Only a few people knew about it, Mark and the dinner party. Someone must have told them." He took a deep breath before continuing. "I know this seems like another disaster, but I'm not going to let this situation destroy everything." Grace crossed her arms, watching Ethan closely. "You understand that this story doesn't just affect me emotionally, right? Now my name is also associated with this ridiculous bet. I have a job, friends, a life." Ethan nodded. "I know, and I'm trying to correct that. I've already spoken to my communications team to clarify that this was my error in judgment. I will take the blame publicly if necessary." Grace hesitated. As furious as she was, she saw something different in Ethan. Maybe it was the sincerity in his voice, or the fact that he seemed to finally be facing the consequences of his actions without running away. Still, she stood her ground. "This isn't about how you fix your image. It's about what you do to fix us." Ethan decides to make an unexpected move that could change everything. But is Grace ready to accept it? Determined to prove his commitment, Ethan called a press conference. He knew his reputation was at stake, but he also knew he needed to do something big to show Grace that he was willing to change. In front of cameras and journalists, he began his statement. "Today, I am here to admit a mistake. A foolish bet I made put my relationship with someone I love deeply at risk. There are no excuses for what I did, but I want to make it clear that I am committed to becoming a better person." While watching the broadcast on TV, Grace was torn. Part of her admired Ethan's courage in publicly admitting his mistakes, but another part still felt the pain of being treated like a challenge. After the speech, Ethan went home exhausted. When Grace arrived, he looked at her expectantly. "I did this for you. For us. I know it doesn't fix anything, but it's the first step." Grace took a deep breath before responding. "It was a great gesture, Ethan. But gestures are no substitute for real change. You're going to need a lot more than that to regain my trust." Grace suggests they spend time apart to reflect on what they really want, leaving Ethan with more challenges ahead. Grace decided she needed space to think. She packed a small suitcase and went to the house of her best friend, Emma, who had always been an unconditional support. "I need time to figure out how I really feel, Emma. I don't know if I can forgive Ethan." Emma listened carefully and suggested something that surprised Grace. "Maybe you need to figure out who you are without him. Use this time to focus on yourself, your dreams, and what makes you happy." Meanwhile, Ethan faced the reality of being alone in the apartment. The days seemed endless, and he began to reflect deeply on his choices and priorities. He realized that, for the first time, he was truly vulnerable. In Grace's absence, Ethan decided to seek therapy. He knew he needed to deal with his control and ego issues before trying to win Grace back. During the first session, the therapist asked, "Why do you think you need to change?" Ethan responded after a long pause, "Because for the first time, I feel like someone has seen who I really am. And I want to be better, not just for her, but for myself." And as Ethan works to transform himself, Grace begins to realize something unexpected about her own feelings. During her time away from Ethan, Grace began to reflect on her own choices and values. She realized that despite the pain Ethan had caused, he wasn't solely responsible for the problems between them. She had also allowed the relationship to be built on shaky foundations. Emma, always perceptive, commented during a conversation, "You know, Grace, maybe this breakup isn't just about him changing. Maybe it's about you also figuring out what you really want in life." Those words stuck with Grace. She decided to enroll in a creative writing course, something she had always wanted to do, but never had the courage to do. Over the next few days, she began to feel a new energy, as if she was rediscovering parts of herself that she had lost. Meanwhile, Ethan continued his journey of self-discovery. He began attending support meetings for entrepreneurs facing personal crises, where he encountered others dealing with failures and regrets. During one of these meetings, an older participant said something that stuck with Ethan. "Acknowledging your mistakes is the first step, but living differently is the real test." Grace receives a sincerely written letter from Ethan that leaves her deeply emotional and confused about her next step. On Saturday morning, Grace found a letter on Emma's door. It was Ethan's. With shaking hands, she opened it and began to read. "Grace, I know words aren't enough, but I needed to write to you. During these weeks away, I realized things about myself that I never wanted to admit. I've always tried to control everything and everyone, as if this were proof of power. But you showed me that true power lies in vulnerability, honesty, and respect. I want you to know that I'm changing, not for you, but because I need to be a better person. You deserve someone who loves you for who you are, without conditions or stupid bets. I hope that one day you can see that in me. But even if you don't see it, I want you to know that I'm grateful you crossed my path. You have changed my life in ways I never thought possible. With love, Ethan." Grace finished the letter with tears in her eyes. The words were different, more mature, more true. She knew she still had a lot to think about, but for the first time she felt a spark of hope. Grace decides to confront Ethan to understand if he has really changed, or if this is all another desperate attempt to win her back. After reading the letter, Grace decided she needed to hear from Ethan in person. She arranged to meet in a park near his apartment, a quiet place where they could talk away from prying eyes. When Ethan arrived, he looked different. More humble, less tense. Grace realized this immediately, but maintained her firm stance. "I received your letter," she began, holding the words so he could feel their weight. "But letters are easy to write. I want to hear from you, face to face." Ethan sighed deeply before responding. "I wrote that letter because I needed to get my thoughts in order. But you're right, Grace. Words aren't enough. So I'm here to tell you that I'm not trying to win you back with grand gestures. I'm just trying to be honest." Grace studied every word, every expression. "Honest," she repeated, crossing her arms. "So tell me, Ethan, what do you really want from me?" He looked at her, his expression full of vulnerability. "I want you to know that I'm changing because I realize I can't live the way I used to. I want to be a better man, Grace. I don't know if that will be enough for you, but that's where I am." Grace felt the sincerity in his words, but she still hesitated. "What if I tell you that I can't forgive what happened? That I may never be able to trust you again?" Ethan responds unexpectedly, leaving Grace speechless and planting a seed of doubt in her own heart. Ethan took a deep breath, looking at Grace with an expression of acceptance. "If you can't forgive me, I'll understand. I won't insist, nor try to convince you. I just want you to know that, regardless of us, I will continue to change. For me, not just for you." These words took Grace by surprise. She expected arguments, justifications, even empty promises. But instead, Ethan seemed genuinely resigned, as if he had finally learned the importance of respecting her space. "Is that all?" Grace asked, trying to hide her surprise. "Are you saying you'll move forward if I decide we can't continue?" Ethan nodded slowly. "Yes, Grace. I want to be with you, but I can't force it. It wouldn't be fair to you or me. If I've learned anything from all of this, it's that respect is the foundation of any true relationship." Grace looked at him, trying to process the change she saw. Something about Ethan seemed different, but she was still on the fence. "What if I decide to give you another chance? What will be different this time?" Ethan smiled slightly. "Everything, Grace. Because now I know what it means to truly love someone." Grace decides to test him, setting conditions for Ethan to prove that his changes are real and lasting. After a long silence, Grace made a decision. If you really want to try again, Ethan, let's do it my way. I want to see if you've really changed, or if this is just another ploy of yours. Ethan nodded, eager to hear what Grace had to say. Fine. Say what you want. First, I want you to spend more time with the people you hurt. You said you're trying to make up for what you did, so I want to see that in practice, she began. And second, I want you to do something for yourself. Something that shows you're no longer living just to compete or impress others. Ethan was silent for a moment, absorbing her words. I accept, he said, his voice full of determination. But tell me something, Grace. Is this about proving something to you or me? Grace shrugged. Maybe it is for both of us. I just know that if we're going to move forward, I need to believe that you're capable of being someone better. Ethan knew these conditions wouldn't be easy, but he was willing to try. I'll do it, Grace. Not because I need to prove anything to you, but because it's right. As Ethan begins to comply with Grace's conditions, he faces an unexpected obstacle that tests his resolve. Ethan began his journey by visiting one of the families he had harmed in his business dealings. He was nervous but determined. When he knocked on the door, a middle-aged woman opened it, her eyes narrowing as she recognized him. Mr. Bennett, she said, surprised and clearly suspicious. What are you doing here? Ethan took a deep breath before responding. I'm here to apologize. I know it doesn't erase what I did, but I want to try to make up for the damage I caused. The woman hesitated before opening the door. Come in, she said, her voice thick with skepticism. Ethan came in and began to tell his story, explaining how he had changed and why he was there. He offered financial help to rebuild the family's small business, but made it clear that he did not expect to be forgiven. The woman, although touched by his sincerity, still seemed reluctant. I don't know if I can accept this, Mr. Bennett. What you did destroyed us. Ethan nodded, respecting her feelings. I understand, but if there's anything I can do, anything, please tell me. The conversation with the woman brings back painful memories for Ethan, forcing him to confront the mistakes of his past in an even deeper way. Upon leaving the woman's house, Ethan felt an even greater weight on his shoulders. He knew he couldn't undo what he did, but hearing her words brought to the surface a guilt he was only beginning to understand. He returned home and found Grace waiting for him. So, how was it? She asked, trying to hide her curiosity. Ethan sighed. It was difficult. She didn't forgive me, but she didn't kick me out either. I think that's a start. Grace nodded, watching him closely. That's part of the process, Ethan. You can't expect people to just forget everything overnight. I know, he said, but I didn't imagine it would be so painful. He looked at Grace, his expression full of sincerity. Thanks for making me do this. I needed to face these people. Grace felt a small spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, Ethan was really changing. But she knew the road was still long. Ethan receives an unexpected call from someone he hasn't seen in years, bringing new challenges to his journey of redemption. Late in the evening, as Ethan sat on the porch reflecting on the day, his phone rang. He recognized the number, but hesitated before answering. It was James Carter, a former business partner he had harmed years ago during an aggressive merger. Ethan Bennett. The voice on the other end was cold but firm. You didn't expect that call, did you? Ethan was silent for a few seconds before responding. James, I didn't expect it, but I imagine you have good reasons for calling. You're right. I heard rumors that you're trying to right your wrongs. I thought I should hear it directly from you. James' voice carried suspicion. Ethan took a deep breath, realizing this was yet another pivotal moment. James, everything they say is true. I'm trying to change, and I know it doesn't erase what I did, especially to you. I'd like to meet you to talk if you're willing. James was silent for a moment before nodding. Tomorrow, at the cafe on the corner of 12th and Main. If you miss it, you'll never get another chance to talk to me. Ethan realizes that this meeting will not only be about reconciliation, but also an opportunity to confront the worst aspects of his former self. The next morning, Ethan arrived at the cafe before his scheduled time, his mind spinning with anticipation and nervousness. When James entered, his serious expression made it clear that he was not there for friendly conversations. You wanted to talk, Ethan. So talk, James said, sitting down at the table without wasting any time. James, I made terrible mistakes. I destroyed your work, your company, and probably more than I can imagine. There are no excuses, but I'm here to try to do whatever I can to make up for it. James looked at him with narrowed eyes. Do you think an apology and a check can fix years of hurt? Because if so, you're wasting your time. Ethan leaned forward, his voice lower. I don't expect you to forgive me, James, but I want to understand the extent of the damage I've caused and find a way to help if you'll let me. James was silent for a moment, his eyes softening slightly. The company never recovered Ethan. Many families lost their jobs because of your decisions. Do you have any idea what that means? I'm starting to understand, Ethan replied, his voice full of regret. And that's why I'm here. I want to try to rebuild, help whoever I can. James makes an unexpected proposal that may test Ethan's sincerity in his search for redemption. James crossed his arms and looked directly at Ethan. You want to rebuild what you destroyed? Then prove you're willing to do the hard work. No shortcuts, no easy money. Help my community, the same one you dismantled. Ethan was intrigued. How do you suggest I do this? James explained that since the company's collapse, the small town where his factory was located had faced severe economic difficulties. He suggested that Ethan fund a community center that would offer trainings and support to affected families. But that won't be enough, James continued. You will have to get involved personally. I want you to see up close the impact your actions have had. Ethan agreed, even though he knew it would be challenging. I'll do it, James. Not because I want to clear my conscience, but because it's the right thing to do. James nodded slowly. We'll see if you really mean it. As Ethan begins his work in the community, he discovers personal stories that expand his understanding of the impact of his past actions. Ethan immediately started working on the project. He hired architects, sought out local partners, and ensured everything was planned with maximum efficiency. However, James insisted that he personally visit the families who would benefit. On one of these visits, Ethan met Martha, a single mother who had lost her job at James' factory. Martha told how she had struggled to support her 2 young children after being laid off, working 3 jobs to make ends meet. Do you think you know what changes, Ethan? Martha asked, her voice thick with emotion. Try explaining to your kids why there's no dinner on the table. Try telling them that Christmas will be just another day. Martha's words stuck with Ethan, reinforcing his determination to do more than just invest money. He started dedicating more time to the project, meeting more people, listening to their stories, and looking for practical ways to help them. During one of these visits, Ethan receives an urgent call from Grace, who reveals a new challenge in their relationship. Ethan was in a meeting with James and other community leaders when he received a message from Grace. We need to talk. It's urgent. Feeling a chill run down his spine, he quickly said goodbye and drove to her apartment. Grace received him with a serious expression, different from the woman he had begun to see more hopeful in recent days. Ethan, I'm happy with the changes you've made, but something happened, and we need to resolve it. What are you talking about? Ethan asked, worried. Grace explained that a journalist had discovered the initial reason for their marriage, the bet. She had evidence and was threatening to publish a story that could destroy not only Ethan's reputation, but also his progress with Grace and the community. She wants an interview, Ethan, Grace said, and I don't know if I'm ready to deal with that. Ethan must decide whether to face the truth publicly or try to hide the scandal, knowing that his choice will impact everyone involved. Ethan was silent for a few moments, processing the information. He knew that trying to hide the truth would only make the situation worse. For the first time, he realized that facing the consequences was the only way to move forward. Grace, he began, his voice firm, I'll handle this, but I need your help. If I run away now, I'll be proving that I haven't changed. Grace sighed, clearly torn. You understand what that means, right? Your reputation, your company, everything you're trying to build in the community could fall apart. Ethan nodded. Yes, I understand. But hiding it would be like betraying you and all the people I'm trying to help. It's time to be honest. They decided together that Ethan would do the interview, but on his terms. He would demand that the journalist hear the whole story, including what he was doing now to make up for his mistakes. During the interview, Ethan makes an unexpected revelation that could change the narrative in his favor or destroy everything. The interview was scheduled for the next day in a discreet cafe. The journalist, an astute woman named Rachel Carter, was prepared with a stack of documents and pointed questions. "So, Ethan," Rachel began, adjusting her glasses, "is it true that your marriage to Grace began as part of a bet?" Ethan took a deep breath, looking directly at her. "Yes, it's true. It was a gamble. An impulsive and immature decision that I deeply regret. But that's only half the story." Rachel raised an eyebrow. "So what's the other half?" Ethan explained how his relationship with Grace had changed his worldview, how he had come to realize the superficiality of his previous life, and how he was now dedicated to repairing the damage he had caused. "Grace is not just my wife," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "She's the reason I'm trying to be a better man. And even if it costs me my reputation, I won't run away from the truth." Rachel looked intrigued, but not convinced. "What about the community you harmed? Do you think these recent actions are enough to redeem what you did?" "No," Ethan replied sincerely. "Nothing can erase the past. But I can guarantee that I will do everything in my power to build a better future, for them and for me." Rachel's piece is published with an unexpected perspective, bringing both criticism and support for Ethan. When the article was published, Ethan knew he would face a whirlwind of reactions. And he was right. While some people praised his honesty and effort to change, others attacked him mercilessly. The headline read, "From Arrogance to Redemption, the Man Behind the Bet." The article told the full story, highlighting Ethan's mistakes but also emphasizing his recent work in the community. However, the most significant impact came from the community he was trying to help. Some families were suspicious, thinking he was just seeking publicity. Others, like Martha, publicly defended him. "He made mistakes," Martha said in a local interview. "But what matters is what he's doing now. He's here, present, trying to fix what he can. And that's more than most people would do." Ethan felt both relief and weight from her words. He knew that every step would be a battle to prove that his change was genuine. An old rival of Ethan's comes forward with a new accusation that threatens to further destabilize his progress. A few days after the article was published, Ethan received a call from an unknown number. On the other end of the line, a familiar voice echoed, "Ethan Bennett." Long time ago. It was Daniel Hayes, a former business partner who had lost everything in a deal Ethan manipulated years ago. "I saw your article. Interesting how you're trying to redeem yourself. But you forgot about me, didn't you?" Ethan tried to remain calm. "Daniel, I know I've caused you a lot of pain. If there's anything I can do to make it up to you, I'm willing to listen." Daniel laughed, but his voice was cold. "It's not that simple, Ethan. You destroyed my life. I want justice, and I won't stop until I get it." Ethan felt the weight of Daniel's words, knowing he was about to face another battle. "So, tell me what you want, Daniel." "I want the world to know who you really are," Daniel replied. "If you think you've changed, prove it. But I'm not going to make it easy for you." Daniel threatens to reveal compromising documents from Ethan's past, putting his credibility and recent efforts at risk. Ethan arranged to meet Daniel at an isolated restaurant, prepared to face whatever was necessary. When he arrived, he saw Daniel sitting with a folder full of documents in his hands. "Ethan," Daniel began, his tone thick with spite, "these papers detail every move you made to destroy my company. Imagine what would happen if this came out now." Ethan looked at the documents, immediately recognizing the gravity of the situation. "Daniel, I'm not going to deny any of this. But if you're here to destroy me, why didn't you do it directly?" "Because I want to hear from you," Daniel replied, his voice softer. "I want to know if you've really changed, or if this is all just another game of yours." Ethan took a deep breath, looking at Daniel sincerely. "I've changed, Daniel. I can't erase the past, but I'm trying to build something new, something that makes up for at least part of what I did." Daniel was silent for a few moments before putting the documents away. "Prove it, Ethan, and maybe I'll reconsider." Daniel suggests an unlikely partnership, but with conditions that could test the limits of Ethan's determination. Ethan left the meeting with Daniel with conflicting thoughts. Daniel's proposal was not only a test of his integrity, but also an opportunity to prove that his transformation was genuine. Daniel suggested they create a joint fund to help small businesses affected by dishonest corporate practices, something he believed Ethan owed the world. "You want to show that you've changed? Then show it with actions, not just words," Daniel said before taking his leave. Ethan knew that by accepting, he would put his credibility on the line again. but I also knew it was a chance to do something really meaningful. He reached out to Grace to discuss the idea, his trust in her becoming his anchor in times of doubt. Grace listened intently, her gaze fixed on Ethan. "That's what you need to do," she said. "Not to prove something to him, but to yourself. This is the path you have chosen, Ethan, and it will not be easy." With Grace's support, Ethan agreed to move forward with the plan, even though he knew working alongside Daniel would be an emotional roller coaster. During the first meetings to establish the fund, an old secret of Daniel's comes to light, further complicating the partnership. As Ethan and Daniel were planning the fund's launch, something unexpected happened. A longtime employee of Daniel's came to Ethan with a surprising revelation. Daniel had also participated in dishonest practices at his company before losing everything. Ethan confronted Daniel directly. "I heard something about you," Ethan said during an office meeting. "You also have a score to settle with people you've harmed." Daniel initially seemed irritated, but soon let out a sigh. "It's true," he admitted. "I wasn't better than you then. The difference is that I paid for it and lost everything. You still have something to lose." Daniel's honesty surprised Ethan, but it also created a new dynamic between them. They both carried a tainted past, and in a way, this brought them together in their common goal. "So let's do this right," said Ethan. "No secrets, no half-truths. This fund is not about us. It's about the people we will help." Daniel and Ethan must face public backlash when their pasts come to light during the launch of the fund. The fund's launch was met with a mix of enthusiasm and skepticism. The press highlighted both Ethan and Daniel's efforts and their controversial pasts. Headlines like "Two villains seeking redemption" emerged, dividing opinions. Ethan, used to pressure, stood his ground. During a press conference, he declared, "We recognize our mistakes, and that's why we're here. This fund is a chance to repair damage, not erase the past. We know trust is something we need to earn." Grace watched from the audience, proud of Ethan's stance. She knew he was exposing himself in a way he never had before, but she also knew it was part of his journey. Daniel, although less comfortable with the attention, also took the floor. "I've been wrong in the past," he said, "but I want to use what I learned to help others not make the same mistakes." In the midst of the repercussions, a small company appears with a story that directly connects Ethan and Daniel's pasts. Among the many stories sent to the fund, one caught Ethan's attention. A small family business that he had destroyed years ago was now seeking help to get back on its feet. The name brought back painful memories, and he knew he couldn't ignore it. Ethan insisted on visiting the company in person. Grace accompanied him, offering support. When they arrived, they were greeted by a middle-aged man named Mark, whose gaze carried a mixture of pain and hope. "You destroyed us," Mark said bluntly, "but we're here because we believe people can change. I just hope you really have." Mark's sincerity shook Ethan. He knew words wouldn't be enough. He offered not only financial support but also his experience to help the company get back on its feet. While helping Mark, Ethan discovers that a disgruntled former employee of the fund is trying to sabotage his efforts. While working with Mark and his family, Ethan began to notice signs that someone was interfering in the background. Documents disappeared, contracts were canceled without explanation, and negative rumors began to circulate. Daniel was the first to realize the gravity of the situation. "This isn't a clerical error," he told Ethan. "Someone is trying to take us down." After an internal investigation, they discovered that a former employee, fired for misconduct, was behind the sabotage. He had created a scheme to embezzle funds and, when discovered, began spreading lies about Ethan and Daniel. Ethan confronted the saboteur, but decided not to pursue the case publicly. "We'll resolve this internally," he told Daniel. "Our focus must remain on the people we are trying to help." Despite resolving the issue, the episode puts even more pressure on the already tense relationship between Ethan and Daniel. Tensions between Ethan and Daniel have finally reached breaking point. During a strategy meeting, they discussed intensely how to deal with recent challenges. "You want to resolve everything internally," Daniel said, frustrated. "But that only makes us more vulnerable. We need to be firmer." "Steady, yes," Ethan replied, trying to remain calm. "But we can't deviate from the goal. This fund isn't about us, Daniel." The argument intensified until Daniel stood up, throwing the folder of documents on the table. "Maybe this fund was never a good idea," he said before leaving the room. Grace tried to calm Ethan down afterwards. "He needs time," she said. "You both have complicated pasts, but you need each other to make this work." Ethan faces the decision of going it alone or trying to reconcile his partnership with Daniel to save the fund. After Daniel's abrupt departure, Ethan felt torn. He knew that the fund would only be truly effective if the two worked together, but he also knew that the differences between them made this a constant challenge. Grace found Ethan in the living room, where he was sitting quietly, looking out over the city. "You know you need to sort this out, right?" she said softly, sitting down next to him. Ethan sighed. "He's right about some things, but he also needs to understand that we can't use the same tactics that got us here." Grace held his hand. "Then show him there is another way. You two have a lot in common, even if you don't admit it." Ethan spent the night pondering how to approach Daniel. He knew he would need patience and a gesture that demonstrated his sincerity. The next morning, she decided to visit him at home to try to reconcile. During the conversation with Daniel, Ethan discovers a detail of his story that changes his perception of his partner. Ethan arrived at Daniel's house with a bottle of wine and a look of determination. When Daniel opened the door, his surprised expression was replaced by a mixture of skepticism and curiosity. "We need to talk," Ethan said bluntly. "Either to resolve this or to end it once and for all." Daniel hesitated before letting him in. They sat down in the living room, where Ethan began talking about the importance of the fund and the impact they were already making. Daniel, still reluctant, listened in silence. "You told me you lost everything," Ethan said, "but you never talked about how it changed you." Daniel was silent for a moment before responding. "Losing everything was the only way to see myself for who I really was. Arrogant, ruthless, and empty. It took years for me to understand that I needed to change." Ethan realized they shared more than just a complicated past. They were both on parallel journeys of redemption, and this understanding helped him see Daniel differently. The conversation leads to a renewed partnership proposal, but with a condition that surprises Ethan. Daniel agreed to resume the partnership, but with a clear condition. "If we're going to continue, we need to ensure that the fund has full transparency," he said. "No secrets, no shortcuts." Ethan agreed, even though he knew it would mean facing more intense criticism from the public and the press. They called a press conference to announce the changes to the fund, highlighting their commitment to honesty. During the event, Ethan gave an emotional speech. "We are here because we recognize our mistakes and want to make a difference. It won't be easy, but it is necessary." The public response was mixed, but many began to see the sincerity in his actions. Grace, who was watching from afar, felt proud of Ethan's progress. After the event, Ethan and Daniel receive a letter from a company that had been destroyed years ago, asking for an urgent meeting. The letter came from a small Detroit company that had gone bankrupt due to the practices of Ethan and Daniel in their darkest days. The letter not only asked for financial help, but also an explanation and possibly an apology. Ethan and Daniel traveled to Detroit to meet with the previous owners, a couple named Sarah and Mike. The meeting was tense from the start, with Sarah expressing her frustration. "You took everything from us," she said, holding back tears. Ethan responded honestly. "Nothing I say can fix the past, but I'm here to acknowledge what we did and try to help rebuild what we destroyed." Daniel, initially more reserved, also expressed his regret. "We were blinded by greed, and it cost us humanity. We want to do better now." Sarah makes a surprising proposal to Ethan and Daniel that could change the future of the fund. Sarah, after hearing the apologies, made a proposal that left Ethan and Daniel speechless. "I want you to work with us," she said. "I want them to help rebuild our company not just with money, but with their time and knowledge." Ethan was surprised, but saw this as an opportunity to redeem himself in a meaningful way. Daniel, on the other hand, hesitated. "It's not that simple," he said. "Starting a business again requires more than just good intentions." "I know," Sarah replied, "but you owe us this. And perhaps this is the only way to prove that you have truly changed." Ethan accepted the challenge immediately, willing to show he was committed. Daniel agreed after much reflection, realizing that this could be a way of confronting his own demons. During the rebuilding process, Ethan discovers an unexpected connection between Sarah's company and an important event from his past. During one of the meetings with Sarah and Mike, Ethan began to familiarize himself with the company's old documents. While analyzing the financial records and contracts, one piece of information caught his attention. The name of one of the subsidiaries that collaborated with a company seemed strangely familiar. This company here, Ethan pointed to the paper. Did it provide materials for you? Sarah nodded. Yes, they were our main suppliers until we closed. Ethan was silent for a moment, his face expressing a mix of shock and discomfort. He recognized the name of the company as being one of the first he had bought and liquidated during his rise in the market. I was responsible for this acquisition, Ethan admitted, his voice filled with guilt. That means I was the beginning of the end for you, long before Daniel arrived on the scene. Sarah and Mike sat in silence, processing the new revelation. So you've wronged us twice, Mike said, his voice thick with emotion. Ethan felt the weight of the words and realized that his journey of redemption would not only be about helping their company get back on its feet, but also about facing the full extent of the impact of his actions. As Ethan tries to deal with this new revelation, Daniel discovers a crucial detail that could speed the company's recovery, but at an unexpected cost. While Ethan struggled with the weight of his revelations, Daniel took time to study Sarah and Mike's old company processes. He found a promising opportunity, a contract with a large retail chain that could be renewed, guaranteeing the company's financial stability in a short time. This might work, Daniel told Ethan and Sarah, but we will have to invest more money and take significant risks. Sarah looked hopeful, but Ethan hesitated. He knew that taking this risk could be dangerous, especially considering the fund was already under public scrutiny. If we fail, we're putting everything at risk, Ethan mused. If we don't try, we will be dooming this company, Sarah replied, determined. And maybe this is the chance we all need. Daniel was surprised by Sarah's courage, and Ethan, even though he was still afraid, agreed to go ahead with the plan. During negotiations with the retail chain, Ethan comes across an old rival who is not willing to facilitate the return of Sarah and Mike's company. Negotiation with the retail chain led Ethan and Daniel to an unexpected meeting with Nathan Caldwell, a businessman known for his relentless stance in the market. Nathan had been a rival of Ethan's in the past, and the two had a history full of resentment. Well, said Nathan upon seeing Ethan. Who knew the great Ethan Blake would now be asking for favors? Ethan maintained his composure, even though Nathan's words irritated him. We are not asking for favors. We are proposing a partnership that will be beneficial to both parties. Nathan laughed. You've always been good with words, Ethan. But why should I help save a company that's clearly bankrupt? Sarah intervened, her voice firm and determined. Because this company deserves a second chance. And because we have something that could benefit your network, if you're willing to listen. Nathan watched Sarah curiously. Her courage intrigued him, but he wasn't about to make things easy. Nathan proposes a difficult condition for the partnership, placing Ethan in an ethical dilemma that tests his transformation. Nathan proposed a deal that could save Sarah and Mike's company, but at a high price. He wanted exclusivity on products, which would limit the company's future growth. Ethan met with Sarah, Mike, and Daniel to discuss the proposal. If we accept, we will be selling our future, said Sarah, visibly frustrated. But if we refuse, we may lose the only chance to save the company now, Daniel argued. It's a risk we need to consider. Ethan was silent for a long moment before speaking. We can't accept that. If we're here to do right, we can't compromise their future. Despite the pressure, Sarah was relieved by Ethan's decision. You've changed, she said with a small smile. And that means more than any contract. In the days that followed, Ethan and Daniel found another solution, a smaller but ethical partnership that helped the company take the first steps towards recovery. After negotiating with Nathan, Sarah receives an unexpected proposal from a competing company that was impressed by her determination. This company, led by a young executive named Evelyn Ross, offers a partnership to promote Sarah and Mike's company's products. I believe in your potential, Evelyn says, and I want to help rebuild what was lost. The offer seems like a gift from fate, but it comes with challenges. The partnership would require Sarah and Mike to scale production quickly, something they were still learning how to do with limited resources. Ethan offers to help oversee the expansion, but his involvement brings up feelings that Sarah still struggles to process. As they work together to expand the company, Sarah realizes that Ethan's efforts are not only about making amends for past mistakes, but also about earning his trust. Despite her resistance, she begins to notice the small changes in Ethan, the humility, the patience, and the true desire to help. One night after a particularly successful meeting, Sarah and Ethan end up talking alone. The conversation flows naturally, and for the first time, they talk about their lives beyond business. "I never imagined it could change like this," Ethan confesses. "But meeting you made me want to be better." Sarah still hesitates, but the sparkle in her eyes suggests that she is not as closed off to the future as she once was. Nathan Caldwell, not satisfied with being rejected, returns with a new strategy to harm the company's growth. He uses his influence to make supply contracts difficult, pressuring suppliers to break up with Sarah and Mike. Ethan discovers Nathan's maneuvers and confronts his rival. "You're not going to destroy any more lives to prove your point, Nathan," Ethan says, glaring at him. Nathan, with a cynical smile, replies, "Let's see where your newfound morality can take you, Ethan." Ethan realizes he needs to find a way to protect Sarah and Mike without falling for Nathan's power games. With contracts threatened, Ethan proposes a bold idea: diversify suppliers and start manufacturing some of the materials in-house. Despite the difficulties, Sarah and Mike agree, and the team begins working to implement the plan. During a long night of work, Sarah watches Ethan, who is visibly tired but determined. For the first time, she feels a mix of gratitude and something deeper. "Ethan," she says softly, "I never thanked you for all this." "No need," he replies with a small smile. "I'm here because I want to be." The growing closeness between the two begins to change the dynamics of their relationship. Evelyn, the partner in the new company, reveals to Sarah that she knew Ethan from before. "He wasn't an easy man to deal with, but I see something different in him now," Evelyn comments. "You did something no one could." Sarah is thoughtful. Evelyn's words reinforce something she already knew, but was afraid to admit. Sarah begins to wonder if she is ready to give love another chance, despite her complicated past. Inspired by the changes he sees in himself and the company, Ethan decides to take a bold step. He plans a business proposal for Sarah and Mike, a formal partnership where he would invest to expand the company even further. "I want to be a part of this, not as the man who destroyed it, but as someone who helps build it," Ethan says during the meeting. Sarah is moved, but still reluctant. "What if this doesn't work?" she asks. "Then I'll know I at least tried to do the right thing," Ethan replies truthfully. Sarah accepts the proposal, but with conditions that put Ethan to the test. While organizing the documents for the new partnership, Sarah finds an old letter from her father. In it, he talks about his vision for the company and how he dreamed of Sarah taking it to new heights. The words move her deeply and make her reflect on what really matters in her life. "My father believed that forgiveness was the most powerful force," she comments to Mike. Her father's words make Sarah reconsider how she feels about Ethan. Nathan, in his latest attempt to harm the company, files a lawsuit against Sarah and Mike, alleging breach of contract. The situation threatens to destroy everything they have built. Ethan, using his influence and contacts, works tirelessly to assemble a strong legal team. "I won't let him take this away from you," Ethan promises Sarah. The trial approaches, and Sarah finds herself torn between gratitude and her growing feelings for Ethan. In court, Ethan's team presents a solid case, unmasking Nathan's manipulative tactics. The judge rules in favor of Sarah and Mike, allowing the company to continue operating. After the trial, Sarah hugs Ethan for the first time. "I don't know how to thank you," she says with tears in her eyes. "You already said thank you," Ethan replies, "for giving me the chance to be someone better." Sarah realizes she is ready to leave the past behind and move forward with Ethan. Months later, Sarah and Ethan are at a company event, celebrating the first successful year since the rebuild. During her speech, Sarah looks at Ethan and says, "None of this would be possible without you. Thank you for believing." After the event, Ethan surprises her with an unexpected request. "Sarah, I know I've made a lot of mistakes, but I want to spend the rest of my life trying to make things right with you. Will you marry me? For real this time?" With tears in her eyes, Sarah responds, "Yes, Ethan, I do." After the emotional proposal, Sarah and Ethan decide to take things slow. They start to dedicate more time to each other, getting to know their dreams, fears, and aspirations better. Memories of the past still hover over them, but their determination to build something solid is stronger. One night, during a simple dinner at home, Ethan asks Sarah, "When was the moment you knew you wanted to move on with me?" She thinks for a moment before responding, "When I saw you weren't just apologizing. You were changing. Not for me, but because you knew you needed to be better for yourself." Ethan realizes he still has a lot to prove, promises to show Sarah every day that she made the right choice. Sarah and Ethan's routine, although full of happy moments, is also marked by challenges. Ethan, previously accustomed to a life of intense work and quick decisions, needs to learn to slow down and prioritize his relationship. Sarah, on the other hand, has to deal with the fear that everything could fall apart. On a quiet Sunday, they have a heartfelt conversation about their fears. "What if we don't work out?" Sarah asks. Ethan takes her hand and responds, "Then we'll try again until we get it right. What matters is that I won't give up on you." An unexpected opportunity at Sarah's job threatens to cause tension in their relationship. Sarah receives a job offer to lead an international project in Europe. It's the opportunity of a lifetime, but it also means being away from Ethan for months. She shares the news with him, expecting support, but is met with hesitation. "I want you to follow your dreams," Ethan says, visibly torn. "But it means we'll be away from each other for a long time." Sarah wonders if accepting the offer is worth the risk of putting their relationship to the test so soon. After many conversations and sleepless nights, Sarah decides to accept the offer. Ethan, although reluctant, supports her, but proposes a solution. "We want to make this work, Sarah. Whether it's visits, calls, or whatever it takes. I don't want you to feel like you have to choose between me and your career." Sarah is moved by the gesture and realizes how much Ethan has changed. "I couldn't do this without you," she says, holding his hand. The farewell at the airport is emotional and full of promises of a future together. With Sarah in Europe, the long-distance relationship proves to be more of a challenge than they imagined. Jet lag, busy schedules, and constant homesickness begin to test them both. Despite this, they stay in touch, sending daily messages and making video calls whenever possible. One night, as they talk, Ethan confesses, "I never thought I could miss someone so much." Sarah smiles, but her eyes show the same longing. "We're closer than it seems," she says, trying to comfort him. An unexpected crisis at Ethan's work puts even more pressure on the relationship. Nathan, resentful of his previous defeats, resurfaces with a plan to sabotage Ethan's business. He manipulates information to undermine important contracts, putting Ethan in a vulnerable position. Ethan tries to hide the situation from Sarah, but she notices something is wrong during one of their calls. "Ethan, you don't have to deal with this alone," she insists. "I'm here, even from afar." Sarah decides to bring forward her return to help Ethan face the crisis. Sarah returns home unexpectedly, surprising Ethan at a time of great stress. When he sees her, he feels a wave of relief and excitement. "I knew you'd come back," he says, hugging her tightly. Together, they analyze the situation and find a creative solution to save the business. The union of the two, now stronger than ever, proves to be the key to overcoming this challenge. The crisis resolves itself, but Ethan realizes he needs to find a balance between work and personal life. With business stabilized, Ethan and Sarah begin to plan their life together in a more concrete way. They decide to buy a house where they can make memories and perhaps start a family. During a tour of an estate, Sarah jokes, "This place looks too big for both of us." Ethan responds with a smile, "I was thinking about leaving room for growth, maybe kids running around." The possibility of having children brings up important conversations about the future. With wedding plans moving forward, Sarah discovers she is pregnant. The news is exciting, but also scary. "Are we ready for this?" she asks. Ethan holds her hands and says, "I don't know if anyone is really ready, but I know I'm ready to try with you." Pregnancy brings new challenges and exciting times for the couple. Finally, the wedding day arrives. It is an intimate celebration, full of emotion and meaning. During the vows, Ethan says, "Sarah, you've changed my life in ways I never imagined. Today, I promise to be the man you deserve every day." Sarah responds, "Ethan, you showed me that true love is about growing and building together. I promise to be your partner in everything, today and always." With the birth of their son months later, Sarah and Ethan begin a new journey as a family, ready to face any challenge that lies ahead, now stronger and more united than ever. Years later, Sarah and Ethan look back on the life they built together with gratitude. The house is full of laughter and memories, and her children run around a garden that once seemed too big. Ethan holds Sarah's hand and says, "Who knew a simple dare would bring us this far?" She smiles and responds, "It was the most difficult challenge of my life, but also the most rewarding." And so, they continue their story, showing that true love is a journey of learning, growth, and forgiveness. If you love this story, don't miss the next one that's waiting for you up here on the screen. Click now to embark on another exciting journey. And if you are not yet registered Timeless Tales USA, subscribe to the channel and activate the bell so you don't miss any of our incredible stories.